Welcome to our channel. Are you ready to dive into a world where fear and the unknown meet in the most unexpected place? Today we are opening doors to dark corners where fear becomes reality and nightmares can become real. Here on our channel, we will reveal the most creepy and disturbing stories based on real events and riddles that excite the mind. Get ready for an exciting journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche and the inexplicable. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss the new terrifying episodes, and click on the bell to keep up to date with the latest and scariest stories. In a remote village surrounded by fields and forests, there was a small, cozy house on the outskirts. It was known for its calm atmosphere and friendly neighbors. However, everything changed when a new family moved into the neighboring house, located just a few meters from the old mansion. At first, the new neighbors, the Rain family, seemed ordinary. They were friendly, welcoming, and eager to establish good relations with others. However, soon the villagers began to notice the oddities associated with this family. Relations between them and other residents became strained, and residents began to discuss their strange behavior. The first oddity appeared when one of the locals, an old man named George, noticed that the Rain family spends most of their time in the basement of their house. Although George was not naturally curious, he was worried that strange sounds were coming from the basement. Loud bangs and rustles, as if someone was dragging heavy objects across the floor. Soon, these sounds were not the only source of concern. Neighbors began to notice that strange sounds were coming from Rain's house at night. Someone scratching on the walls, something scratching the door, and even incomprehensible screams. People started joking about the Rains having their own nighttime entertainment. But deep down, they were worried about what was going on outside the walls of this house. The most frightening moment was the incident when one night George saw their 10-year-old son, Peter, running out of the Rains' basement, covered in dirt and with a scared face. Peter ran off into the woods, and after he was found, he didn't say anything about what happened. However, his eyes expressed horror, and he seemed really scared. After Peter returned from the forest, the villagers became even more concerned about what was happening at Rain's house. They began to avoid this place, and every whisper about the strangeness happening outside its walls only increased their fear. All this time, the Rain family remained in the shadows, and their behavior became more and more withdrawn. Few weeks have passed, and the strangeness has continued, but now it has reached a new level of horror. On the night of the full moon, when the village was plunged into silence, sounds that could not be ignored began to come from Rain's house. Loud screams, as if someone was in agony, and piercing, heart-rending screams. These sounds were so ominous that they made the blood run cold in the veins of everyone who heard them. The next morning, news came to the village that one of the locals, a young guy named Tom, was missing. His car was found parked near Rain's house, and his tracks led to the house and then disappeared without a trace. Many villagers participated in the search for Tom, but no trace of him was found. Everyone was shocked. But perhaps the most shocking thing was that his bloody belongings were found in one of the nearby fields. The next day, when the fear reached its peak, the situation took an even more eerie turn. George, the old man who first noticed the strangeness in the behavior of the Rain family, could not stand it and decided to explore the basement of the Rain house himself, confident that something terrible was hiding there. When George entered the basement, he saw that the place had been turned into something terrible and indecent. The basement was covered in blood, not just stained, completely submerged in it. Pieces of clothing, apparently belonging to missing people, were scattered in the corners, and the walls were covered with creepy drawings and symbols made in blood and something even more terrible. There was a pile of bodies in the center of the basement, and among them, George recognized some of the missing villagers. They were brutally mutilated, and their eyes expressed indescribable horror. Among them was the Rain family, who were dead. Their bodies were found in terrible positions, as if they were reliving their last moments in complete horror. There was a text written in bloody letters on the walls of the basement, which George could make out despite his shock. Here we have gained our freedom and condemned to eternal torment those who betrayed us. Now you will become a part of our eternal darkness." George, discouraged by what he saw, got out of the basement in a hurry and immediately reported the incident to the local authorities. However, when police and investigators arrived at the scene, they found only an empty house. The basement was thoroughly cleaned, not even a trace of blood remained. The bodies of the missing residents and the Rain family disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a complete lack of evidence and a frightening silence. Police launched an investigation, but it quickly hit a dead end. No convincing evidence has been found, nor evidence that the incidents even took place. George was declared insane, and his testimony was ignored, as the ravings of an old man suffering from paranoia. Meanwhile, a real panic began in the village. At night, residents began to see vague but eerie images. Faces distorted in horror appeared in the windows, indistinct whispers and strange sounds were heard, which further increased the fear. Every day, the tension increased. Some residents claimed that they began to be haunted by eerie visions, and they saw in their dreams terrible scenes where their loved ones, all the missing residents, were tortured in an endless hell. The mental state of many was getting worse, and fear filled every corner of the village. One night, when the village was plunging into darkness, George, unable to withstand the torment, decided to take extreme measures. He went back to Rain's house, hoping to find at least some explanation for what had happened. When he entered the building, he was overwhelmed by a wave of horror. The building has apparently changed. The walls were covered in bloodstains, and the entire atmosphere exuded the stench of decay. While George was exploring the house, he noticed that all the doors and windows began to close and freeze, as if they were trying to lock him inside. George, discouraged and panic-stricken, did not realize that his stay at Rain's house was not accidental. As he studied the blood-stained walls and searched for the answer to everything that was happening, his own fate had already been decided. Soon, a shadow appeared behind him, a figure that personified something sinister and decisive. This shadow was one of the locals who, like many others, became part of the dark affairs of the Ryan family. He knew that George was close to solving the mystery and understood that this man needed to be dealt with. Having connected the others to his plan, he began to prepare the last stage of his terrible task. While George was exploring the house, his attention was attracted by some movement on the upper floor. He headed there, not noticing that the doors began to close behind him one by one. As soon as he reached the top floor, he felt his strength leaving him. Noisy footsteps and screams echoed in his ears, as if the building itself had decided to swallow him up. Then, several people in dark clothes came out of the shadows. They were pale and gloomy, their faces distorted by sinister smiles. One of them, the same local resident who planned to eliminate George, approached him, holding a small vial of a poisonous substance in his hands. "It's not personal," he said coldly, "but we can't let anyone find out the truth." One of the people present interrupted George while the others came closer. They tried to present it as a natural heart disease, trying to make death look like the result of natural aging. They had put poison in George's drink, which was in his pocket, and now it was waiting in the corner. George, unaware of the insidious plan, drank from the bottle to calm his nerves. But soon his condition deteriorated dramatically. His body began to tremble and his face was distorted with pain. He fell to the floor, unable to get up. At this moment, everyone around him stood and looked at him with ruthless faces, expressing not only satisfaction, but also a special triumph. They watched as his breathing became more and more ragged, and his eyes with an expression of horror and pain. There was no evidence left for his body, except for the agonizing sounds filling the empty space of the old house. When George finally froze, his eyes were dull and his face was pale. His death looked like a tragic consequence of aging and stress, as if his body simply couldn't stand it. But those who did it knew the truth, and believed that with George gone was the last opportunity to expose their terrible deed.